Hey, everybody, Dave Cooper. Here we are. We are live. We are in West Virginia at the moment. And what I wanted to do is I want to say hello to everybody that is tuning in today. This is a Christmas week. So with the Christmas week, we are going to be coming to you live from all different parts of the East Coast this week. So listen, if you're just joining us today, I'm getting a little feedback. My apologies. One second. So with that today, there we go. So with that today, we are going to be doing reruns all week of shows, some of the greatest shows that we've had. So this is going to be a lot of fun this week. We're going to show you some of the better shows. Today, we are going to revisit our show with Mark Farmer, Modernize or Die, which is going to be a lot of fun. Hey, look at that. Good old Nicholas Capizola is tuning in today. Hey, Uncle Coopy says. Hey, Nicholas, hope all is well. Looking forward to seeing you guys soon. So what's up, Nicholas? I hope you're doing well. The kids are excited to talk to you guys and what have you. So we're going to have some fun this week. All right, everybody, listen. We're going to get into this right now. So at Dave Cooper Live, we are bringing you the people and the processes that are building it better. Our guests and topics include experts in building systems, to building science, to building codes, and the tech used to build it better. And today is no different. Where our expert on today is going to be Mark Farmer, who wrote Modernize or Die. And with Mark Farmer, what they have done is the UK government really bought into this modernization of construction, and it has gone viral over there. And now is part of their code to start doing better ways of construction, modern methods of construction, looking at things differently, building things differently. So if you're going to build, you need to look at better ways of doing it prior to actually doing the build and getting approved for the build. And I think that's a great thing, and it's something we are starting to take a hard look at and understand. So it's going to be good to go, hopefully, moving forward. Hey, Dr. Amar, thank you. Good evening from Aberdeen, Scotland, Robert Gordon University. What is happening, Dr. Amar? Thank you so much for tuning in today as well. All right, so let's get into this today. We are going to do this replay of this conversation with Mark Farmer. I am going to be in the background doing this all during the whole time, and we'll come back at the end. So if you have questions, comments, you can put them up there. I will tag Mr. Mark Farmer in all of this so we can get you answers to your questions. Again, we are live on the road, so please hit that like and share button right now. And if you are not following us on YouTube, please follow us on YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. But again, this is going to be the best of week. Wednesday is going to be a great one. If anybody remembers what IBS was like, the International Builder Show in Las Vegas, we did a live walkthrough during the event, and we're gonna show you that live walkthrough on Wednesday on our product spotlight as well. So with that said, without further ado, let's get into Modernize or Die. Here we go. Welcome, everybody, to DaveCooper.live. This is another Monday expert interview, and it is going to be a doozy. So if you're just joining us right now, please let us know where you're from. Hit that like and share button, because we are live on 3 locations: LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. And if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, after the show would be a good time to go there and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And very important, I have to thank our sponsors. Thank you to Garcia Strongberg, GS4 Studios, for sponsoring our expert interviews on Monday. Without our sponsors, we could not be here every day of every week. Well, almost 6 days out of 7, we're doing this. So Garcia Strongberg out of West Palm Beach, Florida. They are architects, designers, artists. In fact, I guarantee that you have probably stayed in one of their resorts or hotels or buildings that they have built all over the world. So again, thank you, Garcia Strongberg. All right, everybody. So here we are today. This is going to be a fun conversation. We're going to talk with Mark Farmer, Modernize or Die. This is a report that has changed the industry on a global level. And when I say change, people have adopted it or looking at it differently. And I'm going to let Mark get into all of those things. I think it's very important for our country, our leaders, our code writers, our builders associations, and everybody else out there to kind of hear what this is all about. So without further ado, let's bring Mark into the conversation. Mark, how are you, sir?
Hi, Dave.
Hey, listen. So I've been waiting a long time for this conversation, as I'm sure so many others have been waiting for this conversation. So first of all, I know you're very busy, so I want to thank you for your time. Secondly, why don't you? I think the best way to start is, what made you write this report? I think, and then once you say what made you write this report, I want to get into your background a little bit as well. In fact, let's do that first. Why don't you tell us everything from the moment you were born to this very moment in time in the next 3 minutes, and do not leave out any of the gory stuff.
Okay, no pressure then. I suppose, I'll start at the beginning from a construction perspective. So I sort of always knew that I wanted to go into the construction industry, probably because my dad was in the industry. He was a stonemason. So when I was growing up as a kid, he used to take me to construction sites at weekends, and before the days of health and safety, I used to actually help him on the construction sites, doing various things in relation to stonemasonry, marble and granite and things like that. So that got my interest in the industry. And it was just really, when I was going through college, it was just, well, what part of the construction industry do I want to work in? And I decided that I wanted to be involved in the money. So, and we have a particular profession in the UK called quantity surveying, which you don't have in the States, but it's effectively the administration of construction contracts. It's looking after the finances. It's telling clients how much their buildings are going to cost, and then administering the payments and then the financial settlement. So I spent 25 years of my career as a surveyor, working in all sorts of different parts of the market, ranging from heavy civil engineering infrastructure. So I had the privilege of working on projects like the Channel Tunnel back in the late 1980s. It was a major infrastructure project at the time, one of the biggest the UK had ever undertaken. So that was a great learning curve for me. But then increasingly got involved in commercial construction work. So I've been involved in big shopping centres, office blocks, hotels, and then latterly got more and more involved in residential. And residential was probably where I specialised for the latter part of my career. And as I went through my career, I fulfilled different functions, including in big business, one particular business where I spent 20 years of my career. I led the global function for residential, so that led me to go all over the world, get to understand different construction sectors in different parts of the globe, and that was a fantastic opportunity to see beyond the UK. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I decided I wanted to change the scenery, and that sort of last challenge, I suppose, of setting up on my own and doing my own thing, running my own business, which is what I decided to do after having spent many years in big international consultancy. So I set up a new business back in 2016 here in London, specialising in residential consultancy. And about that time, I also participated in a trip to the States, actually, that probably changed my entire life in many respects. And that was a study trip to Chicago to look at the multifamily housing market in the US. And as part of that study tour, I spent a few days with the housing minister, the UK housing minister at the time. And we were talking about various things in relation to construction and home building and the problems the industry had. And he said to me, look, when we get back to the UK, let's have a chat, and maybe you can do something for us as a sort of formal piece of work. And lo and behold, 3 or 4 weeks later, I was in the UK housing ministry, having a discussion about leading a review of the UK construction industry. And one thing led to another, and then by October 2016, that had resulted in the publication of Modernise or Die, which is the title of this session, is the title of my report. Effectively, that's the story. That's the story as to how I got to the point of what we're going to talk about this evening.
Sure. So when with the housing ministry, did they already know that there was an issue, and that's why they were like, how did I really want to understand, how did the conversation come up that Mark Farmer is the guy to do this for us? Like, what did you say? Like, how do you deal with that?
So the reason it was me was probably more luck than judgment in relation to I was in the right place at the right time. I'd written a couple of reports when I was in my previous business, and one of which the housing minister happened to have read. So he knew of my work.
Okay.
But yes, the answer is he knew something wrong with the way in which our construction industry was delivering, not just for home building, but actually for wider construction, including social infrastructure, schools, hospitals, defence, transportation infrastructure. It's not been an issue that people have missed in the UK. Lots of politicians have talked about it for a long, long time, and everyone's seen that the industry's got problems. I suppose the issue's been the political will to want to do something about it. So, I knew there was an issue with the home building targets in the UK at the time. The aspiration from the government, David Cameron was the Prime Minister at that particular point, was to build 250,000 homes per annum in the UK, which doesn't sound a lot in US terms, but bearing in mind we were building probably 130,000, 140,000 at the time, it was a significant step up in where we needed to be. And I knew that unless we changed the model of delivery, we weren't going to deliver that much with the amount of human resources we had. And that was really at the heart of one of the observations that I concluded in terms of the basic structural skills base of the industry wasn't there. There was not enough people to deliver using current techniques, the number of homes that we needed.
Well, that's right. And talking before the show, this is a global issue, isn't it? It sounds like it's not just UK. The United States has the same issue, but you're traveling all over the world, speaking and talking to different governments. Are you seeing the same problem globally?
Yes, it's definitely a generic issue, and it's definitely an issue linked to most developed economies. In relation to this sort of wide, big picture socio-economic and demographic challenge in many respects that we have. So many of the construction industries across the world are facing the same issue, which is an aging workforce. Not enough young people coming into the industry. Kids just don't want to get involved in construction anymore. It's seen as pretty physical, hard work, not an attractive option compared to some other career paths that are now available, particularly in the world of tech. And that is something I've seen and all over the world, as you said. So everywhere from the UK to Australia, New Zealand, the US, Canada, all over mainland Europe, Hong Kong, Singapore, you name it. It's the same story everywhere. There's this issue with declining skills resiliency, issues with quality, issues with ability to control price inflation. They're all recurring themes.
Yeah, for sure. The skilled labor is probably the largest recurring thing, especially with so many, so much housing needed around the globe, not just even in the United States or in Britain or England. It's definitely going to be a huge issue. And I think a lot of your report focused on the skilled labor or lack thereof skilled labor, and the skilled labor coming back into the trades is not going to be the skilled labor we had before they started leaving the trades. What are your thoughts on that? The type of people that we're going to see coming back into this industry?
Yeah, so I think we have a challenge in terms of the cyclicality of construction as well is another issue here, which you get in every economy when there's a downturn, and clearly most economies at the moment are under stress because of COVID. You lose people, you lose good people that have spent many years in the industry. They're trained and proficient, particularly in the trades, but also in the professions as well. And when you're looking to then regrow your workforce in a recovery period, you have to adjust to the changing sort of backdrop, to the skill sets that you have and sort of the outlook of people as well. So as I've said already, particularly on site-based workers, there's less and less generational desire to wanting to be working in heavy manual labor. So there's an issue about what does that mean for construction in terms of replacing those tasks or augmenting workers to do things differently or more effectively and efficiently. On the professional technical side, there's a definite inexorable move towards technology, and the fact that the skills of the past around analog design, drawing table stuff. That's history. We're now in a world where it's about tech. It's about digital technology driving design, driving manufacture, driving site-based activities. And so we have to think about the people that are coming into our industry generationally and skill set wise and adapt to that. And actually, it's an opportunity. For me, it's an opportunity. We have less people available, but those people perhaps have more aptitude and are more flexible to actually do things differently and overcome some of these issues we have around lack of productivity.
Yeah, for sure. All right, listen, everybody, if you're just joining us, please hit that like and share button. We have Mark Farmer on with us, and we are talking about Modernize or Die. I want to thank a couple people real quick, because I know Jerry McCahey from Integra coordinated us, Mark, and I thought that was great. And also Henry Mickelberg, if you're out there, some of the information that you sent me in preparation for this conversation, I wanted to thank you personally as well. All right, so Mark, I mean, there's so much to unpack here. It's funny, the comment section, there's already 15 comments. I don't know if they're questions or what have you, or everybody just saying hi, but I think we're going to have a lot of this today. Why don't you walk us through this journey of Modernize or Die? We set up all these banners, but I'm kind of getting the feeling like, whereas since you started this report, why don't you, can you kind of give us a background of, so what's happened now? What has the UK government adopted, and how has that changed? And how has that also changed what you're doing in other countries, Australia, wherever it may be?
So yeah, it's difficult to know where to start, but in the one big thing that's happened since Modernise or Die in 2016 is the conversation has got louder and it's got more high profile, and I think that's really important. If you're in a world of trying to change an industry, then you have to have a conversation at a high level, and it has to be one that's as industry wide as you can make it. And I'd like to think that some of the reaction that I provoked back in 2016, even just the title of my report, Modernise or Die, is pretty provocative, and that was deliberate. It wasn't meant to be one of these reports that sits on the shelf. It was meant to spark a reaction, not just for effect, for legitimate reasons in terms of the challenges I saw ahead. And I'm pretty positive about the nature of that reaction. So from a UK government perspective, they've recognised many of the themes in that report, and actually have also recognised the importance of having a fit-for-purpose construction industry as a tool of political policy in relation to economic growth. So the ability to build more homes, build schools, build hospitals, create economic growth through commerce is entirely reliant on construction. And if your construction industry is not functioning, then you're going to have a limit to the ability that can use it as an economic tool. And I think the UK government's recognised that. So my push towards innovation, towards modern methods of construction, as we call it in the UK, off-site manufacture, technology, lean, appears to have been accepted by the British government. It's now been embodied in different policy tools since 2016 into the UK industrial strategy, into housing policy. We're continuing to see the reflections of that in terms of how government is prepared to use its own purchasing power and its own client's position to influence construction. So in 2017, the UK government moved towards what was called a presumption in favour of modern methods of construction for its own construction programme, which was for schools and hospitals and prisons and the like. And that led to a whole push from the demand side from government towards innovation. And that's latterly, in the last 6 to 9 months, now starting to be reflected in the home building market as well, where we're seeing public money going into home building starting to be conditioned on the use of innovation. So there's been this sense that government has a role to play in policy terms to help the industry reform and to modernise. It's really tough for the private sector to do that on its own. So what the British government has done is recognised that, and I've seen that to varying degrees also play out internationally, as you say. So the New Zealand government is going through a very similar a programme at the moment of trying to push MMC through its own programmes, particularly its social housing programme. In more structured economies like Singapore and Hong Kong, you see big government interventions to want to push innovation as part of their programs as well. So there's some really strong correlations in terms of how different governments are seeing their own role in trying to promote construction industry reform alongside the private sector.
Sure. And how does one get the governments, get the agencies to kind of grab hold of this? I know here in the United States, most people don't want the government getting a hold of anything, especially political times like today. And getting buy-in from the bigger developers, the bigger builders, where it's like trying to turn a cruise ship, 180 degrees. It just doesn't happen. What are you seeing? How are the governments actually doing some of this stuff, especially in like Commonwealth states, things of that
nature? So I think it's a combination of different approaches, Dave. I think some of it's as simple as what tools do you have in the box? And quite most developed economies don't necessarily have state house building or construction programs beyond public works. So in the UK, for instance, the state does not build homes. It does build schools and hospitals and prisons and roads and railways, but it doesn't build homes. So when it comes to public works like schools and hospitals, it can actually decide what it wants to do by how it commissions its own work. So the procurement models, the design models being used are driving innovation. When it comes to home building, it can only use things like land disposal. So if you've got public land, you make the use of innovation a condition of being able to access that public land. Or when you've got grant funding programs for different elements of support, particularly around social housing, then again, you condition that on the use of innovation. And that has tended to be the way in which governments are intervening. They're using different tools based on what role they play in the construction sector. In the UK, the public sector accounts for about 30% of total construction spend. We have an industry worth about £130 billion sterling, of which about a third is public sector. So the government's a big client, and through its money and its programs, it can exert influence. And which in turn ultimately sort of feeds through into the private sector as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting, right? I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, the governments have their own projects going. So one way of adoption on this is if they buy into the MMC, modern methods of construction, or whatever we'd like to call it, themselves, they can almost lead by example on some of their larger projects. And it's like anything else, if it's successful and it's moving in the right direction, you'd see a lot of the private sector probably adopt or look to adopt as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the key challenge, is how you influence, because you can't change an industry as a government in isolation. And as you quite rightly say, some people are really nervous about government interventions. That's seen as a lot of people would prefer for it to be laissez-faire, free market economics. All I would say from perspective, certainly a UK perspective, the interventions are, I think, are positive ones, because they're actually accelerating a change that if you just left the private sector to get there on its own at its own speed, it would be pretty glacial. It again leads back to some of the issues we have in our industry, in that we're pretty loath to change. We have a culture of survivalism and short-term thinking, and it makes businesses really nervous about going out there and pushing on change, because sometimes the risk of innovation is seen as too much of a risk in a market where people are just living for today, particularly now in the post-COVID environment where things are tough, and construction industry is going to get hit, in whether we like it or not, and lots of businesses will be just wanting to perhaps retrench and not to innovate, not to reinvent themselves at this time. They will want to go back to business as usual. And that, I think, is a big risk, because, when we come out the other side of this, and we'll want to be an industry that's future-proof, that's, fit for purpose, can actually be productive and make good margins, not through charging more money necessarily, but actually cutting out all the waste and inefficiency in our industry that exists at the moment. And pretty much 50% everything we do in our industry, and this is the startling statistic, is waste. That is horrific, to think that we waste half of everything we do, but pretty much are charging twice as much as we could if we did things effectively, is a scary statistic. And that's where the opportunity is for businesses going forward. The innovation is not about innovation for the sake of innovation. It's about making more money. And whether you're an SME, small builder, or you're a multinational construction company, that's the prize. It's going after the waste and being more effective and productive and efficient, and then actually, making more money in the process.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked about this, right? What's the risk of doing nothing? And that was
so pretty much building on what I just said. I think there's an interesting inflection point that I think is coming to the construction industry, not just in the UK but internationally, including in the States. Where I think the risk of doing nothing is actually potentially greater now than the risk of doing something. So that point I raised of people being nervous about innovation and actually nervous about changing things, because actually they're too interested in just surviving. That survivalist short-term instinct is there for a reason. Our industry is tough. It works in a really tough economic environment, and that's why we haven't had the innovation that perhaps we have needed, because who's going to pay for it? Who's going to take the risk? But my view is, for all the reasons I've already outlined in terms of skills decline, the increasing risks of poor quality work impacting on brand and reputation, which I think is another key issue that we're seeing more and more. If you just stand still and just accept that, then you don't have a future. I'm pretty certain of that. I think we're seeing some real big trends in terms of the risk of doing nothing is certainly greater now than the risk of innovation and doing something.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. We're seeing it as well, and I think I know we're going to get into this with disruptors and who the disruptors may be, and how do we bring the workforce back in, and will they be the disruptors? But you also talk about the 10 symptoms of failure. Right. This is something that you also have brought up in conversations. So there's the risk of doing nothing. I mean, does that lead into the 10 symptoms of failure?
Well, yeah, I think the risk of doing nothing is really in response to accepting that the 10 symptoms of failure. And I can quickly show you what those 10 symptoms are, in terms of the sort of points that I raised in my report in 2016. Hopefully you can see that there. These 10 symptoms were right at the front of my report. And these are basically, as I say, they're symptoms as opposed to root causes. So these are all the manifestations of the deeper seated issues we have in our industry. And all of those things there, I'm sure your viewers will all recognize from wherever they are in the world as being core problems for our industry. And the issue is that those symptoms are showing themselves more and more and manifesting themselves more and more in terms of poor quality work, financial fragility, even in good boom times. So, we've had more financial failures in UK construction in the post-global financial crisis recovery period than we've ever had before, which, just doesn't make any sense. It's because all of those symptoms are now starting to show themselves in ways that they've never done before. And when you have that lack of resilience, you have that fragility, because we're losing people, we're losing the sort of the skills base of our industry. And it isn't just about the tradesmen on site. It is about MDs of companies. It's about people in the boardroom. It's about clients. Right? We've got a skills crisis that's sweeping over the industry in every aspect of what we do and every part of what we do. And that's a big risk. And as I say, that risk is now showing itself in a way that we haven't seen before. It means that businesses are no longer necessarily resilient through the future. And every time we go into a cycle, an economic cycle, it's quite easy to ride the downside of the cycle, in that you could shed labor, you retrench, you actually just do the bare minimum. It just gets more and more difficult every time you want to recover, because you can't access that labor. You don't have the business models that are going to be fit for the future. And if you haven't changed your basic the business models to think about technology, to think about off-site manufacturing, to think about assurance and customer focus, then you're just storing up a bigger and bigger problem for the future. And that's what the more progressive businesses are starting to recognize. And even when things look tough, actually, it's not the R&D budget that should be cut first, is one of the things that people are realizing. It's actually, now's the time to get busy in reshaping your business models and thinking about the future.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, now is the time to invest in the R&D. All right, so we talk about that, and I have another slide deck that Henry was nice enough to share as well, right? So there's okay, we know we need to do something. We know that we're increasing, as builders, our risk for litigation and project failures, and those things all come out of this lack of skilled labor, lack of being able to get projects completed on time, lack of being able to just move the ball forward. So now we have also, an issue of, well, what do we call ourselves? What kind of offsite construction am I doing? And what are those, what are those opportunities for me as a developer, as a builder, somebody that wants to look at modern methods of construction? How do I get into it? Because everybody calls it something different globally. It doesn't seem like we have any key terms that are standard.
Yeah, so that whole thing about terminology and absolutely about regularizing our language, our vocabulary is a critical point. And it seems really simple. It seems so simple that why we're talking about it, but it's a major blocker, and it's something I recognized fairly early on in terms of certainly the UK use of the term modern methods of construction, MMC, which is pretty well established and it's quite well accepted with politicians as well. So that's the reason we use it, because even the Prime Minister uses and knows what that term means. So it's really important that we play to that in terms of its alignment to what others recognise it as being. But I recognised about 2 or 3 years ago there needed to be some more work done around regularising and defining what modern methods of construction really meant. So I was chairing a working group at the time for the UK Housing Ministry, tasked with various things, but one of which I thought, well, actually, there's a great opportunity here to regularise this language. And we came up with a new 7-category model that we published last year. And it was endorsed by the British government. And effectively, it set out a spectrum of different approaches to modern methods. And, the operative term is method. So that it's a method. It's not about whether it's timber or steel or concrete. It's not about material. It's about a methodology of delivering construction. And those methods range from, as you'd expect, off-site manufacturing. And that might be volumetric modular construction, which you see there in category 1. So category 1 is what you would ordinarily call 3D volumetric modular construction, of which there's an increasing amount happening. Category 2 is more about panelized construction. That could be your prefabricated stick framing systems, light gauge steel, precast concrete panelization, etc. Category 3 is non-systemized prefabrication. So that could again be precast concrete or other types of non-systemized manufactured goods. Category 4 hasn't really taken off yet, but it's probably going to be coming, and that's 3D printing. A lot of people talk about 3D printing at the moment, particularly in certain countries that are trying to push hard on this, in places like the Middle East, where there's a lot of activity in that, but it's not really taken off. But it's in this category framework because we wanted to future-proof it. Category 5 is non-structural pre-manufacturing, so that includes bathroom pods, kitchen cassettes, roof trusses, and the like. Category 6 is innovative materials, so that could be brick slips, it could be modular wiring looms. And then category 7 is nothing to do actually with off-site construction at all. It's about digital construction on-site, and that includes robotics, exoskeletons, laser scanning, autonomous plant, whole load of things you can do on the site rather than off the site. So those 7 categories immediately tell you that this is a lot more than just modular. MMC is a whole range of taking man hours out of a construction project, and the reason for that is every man hour currently spent on a construction project is a risk of failure, to be quite frank, going back to the reasons we've already debated. And whether that's because labour doesn't turn up on site, whether the labour is non-productive, whether it's not competent and trained to do certain things, whether actually you're reliant on the weather to deliver things in a labour intensive way, every man hour is a risk of failure. So those 7 categories are all about trying to take man hours out of your site construction process.
Yeah, for sure. All right, everybody. So listen, we're going to go to some comments here in just a second and say hi to everybody. We're coming up after we do our comment section. We are going to get back into this conversation, and we're going to talk about a couple different things, right? We're going to agree to disagree about the types of offsite construction, and here we were just kind of going through that, who decides on what we're going to use and how we're going to do it. We're going to talk about culture. We know culture is an issue. You touched on it a little bit earlier. And we may even touch on the immobilized consumer and what that has to do with, modern methods of construction and people moving forward, as well as much, much more on this. So why don't we go to some questions, and then let's come back to all this, and then let's wrap it up on where you think this is going to go in the future. And I know you have some more work that you want to share. All right. Let's see. We're going to start at the top and work our way down. We got Joel Hutchins is saying, afternoon all. I've been looking forward to this one. Thanks for joining us. We got Tom Hardiman from the Modular Home Builders Association here. And he is also World of Modular Building Institute. So glad you could join us, Tom. I think you might know this guy. Andrew Carpenter, listening in from the UK. On last week, I guess it was, maybe a week and a half ago. I mean, what an interesting guy, and who knows, he's won so many awards for acting. Did you know that about him?
I certainly did. Yes, I know Andrew very well, and I know he's very good in cabaret.
Yeah, he is. All right, Rian Newman, here from the UK too. Thank you for joining us today. We have Andrew Seeley, big topic. We got a lot of people to say hi to here. George Ryman, good morning from Phoenix, Arizona. And the one and only good morning, Mark Bare Naked Willie, as we call him, from our BS Friday show, Building Science is what BS Fridays, Building Science. If you haven't seen it, you should tune into that one. A good advocate, good supporter, and somebody that's really making a push to change the industry. Jerry McCaughey, good afternoon, Mark from the West Coast. Jerry from Integra has been integral in our conversation, as well as other conversations that I had. So big double thumbs up to you, Jerry. We got Tom Reddy joining us from Synergy Steel. Hey, Tom, hope all is well. Hey, look at this. Greg Ugaldi. Greg is the immediate past chairman of the National Association of Home Builders. So, Mark, they don't get much higher on the list than Greg when it comes to our National Association of Home Builders. Thanks for joining us today, Greg. We got Tim Seams joining us from Nishiha. And he really is watching us from his treehouse. I said that. He is always, but it's a really nice treehouse. It's not your typical kid's treehouse. I can tell you that for sure. All right. All the way from Vietnam, Alistair Sawyer. Hi, Dave. Interesting as usual. Great. Love it. Man, we got a bunch of comments here. I'm not sure who this LinkedIn user is. Hello, all. Good to join the webinar with like-minded people focused on using quality MMC. I think that is Mark Pittaway is, doing that. And you might know this one. Henry has nothing to say ever. That's Mr. I have nothing to say. Henry. Just kidding, Henry. I don't know if you're on earlier, but I gave you a big thanks out, big shout out earlier. So thank you very much. All right. Rian has a question. As a recruiter in offsite sector, maybe it's a comment. I echo Mark's comments. It's getting incredibly tough to find skilled labor. And then Tom Hardiman has the question. Did the impact of COVID change any recommendations in Modernize or Die, or just further support for the report? That's a great question, Tom. Thank you.
Yeah, it is an absolutely pertinent question. And I think my response to that would be it's been more about reinforcing what I'd already picked up. So what COVID has done is it's exposed the fragility of a labour model that relies on site labour intensity. So obviously with social distancing now imposed on construction sites, that's had an impact on the number of people that you can have working alongside each other and how they work alongside each other. So immediately you're into the risk of lower output. It's actually had, interestingly, a variable impact on productivity, individual productivity, because actually some trades are now better able to get on with their work without crawling over other people, and actually being able to be more productive because there's less people. But in overall output terms, output's down, and most sites are running only at about 80% maximum of where they were pre-COVID. So that, in many ways, COVID has just reinforced my modernise or die recommendations in terms of the fact we have to move to a different model, one that's less labour intensive, more resilient. I suppose the only other thing that I didn't see coming is that when COVID hit and a lot of the international trade was affected in terms of materials and stuff being shipped between countries, clearly COVID hit that as well. And some of the off-site manufacturing businesses were hit equally, but by those issues in terms of sourcing their raw materials. So one of the things I think that comes out of that is probably more focus on resilient supply chains and maybe domestic supply chains. Actually, you have less reliance on imported goods, particularly if you have another COVID-style event that shuts down borders and trade.
Yeah, you know, the supply chain, and I want to, when we get done with this question and answers, maybe that's something we'll touch back when we get back to our conversation. But I'd be interested to learn how the supply chain is reacting if there are more construction processes happening off-site, right? Because it's no longer going to the local lumber yards and local building supplies if a lot of the materials are being sourced directly by these manufacturers. And that's all. It's been a big question here on how they're going to adapt to that. But unless you want to comment on it now.
Yeah, well, very briefly, Dave. So I think the answer is yes, there's a lot going on in terms of the boardrooms of material supply businesses, builders, merchants, and distributors and agents. They all recognise something's going on here in terms of the sort of restack in the value chain. And the issue is that if you're somewhere in that value chain and you're not adding enough value, then there's a risk you're going to get squeezed out. And you know, some of the parts in that whole journey are starting to reevaluate what they have to do to keep up with change. So you know, you're getting product manufacturers now looking at greater levels of consolidation. They're trying to increase what I call pre-manufactured value of their goods, so it involves less labour on site. This whole idea of taking man hours out of the site. The materials distribution and builders merchants chains are starting to think about how they act differently in supplying the off-site market, and that might include things like logistics and transportation services to greater levels of consolidation. So there's clearly something going on in terms of boardrooms at all levels in the supply chain starting to face into this whole off-site debate and modern methods of construction debate.
Yeah, you know what? And to me, I think that's a good thing. That means they have to rethink how we do stuff, even on the supply chain side. How can they innovate? How can they do products better for a manufacturing environment with less waste? So, I mean, there's so much collaboration that I think this forcing that to happen with the supply chain to me is a good thing, no?
It is, yeah. It's got to be good because actually it's driving better outcomes. You know, you're doing it for a reason, which is to remain competitive, to remain relevant, and ultimately all of this should be driving a better outcome. You know, let's not forget modern methods of construction we're not doing it for the sake of it. We're doing it for a better outcome, whether that's actually firms making more money, as I've previously described, because they're cutting the waste. And most importantly, we have to go back to this thing about the consumer. And also often, as we've touched on, the consumer gets left out of this. It gets given the products that it's like a fait accompli. You know, there's your building, take it or leave it, with defects and snagging, you know, 100 pages long. I just don't think that's acceptable anymore. I think we have a greater focus on the end consumer of the buildings, you know, that we create, which, you know, cost a hell of a lot of money. People, you know, whether you're just a domestic consumer buying a house or whether you're an investor putting hundreds of millions of dollars into a big asset, it's no longer acceptable, in my view, to be giving a second-rate job. We've got to be delivering something better.
I love it. All right. So Tom Reddy had a follow-up question. Setting government programs aside, which of the following are you seeing as making the bigger impact on the building industry? A reduction in costs, a quicker schedule, or a reduction in the carbon footprint?
So I'd love to say that the driver for change from within the industry is decarbonisation. The reality is it's not. I think the carbon agenda is going to be driven by regulation. So certainly in the UK, what we're seeing is the government, alongside most other international governments, setting their own timetable for net zero carbon. In the UK, it's 2050. That has a big impact on buildings. You know, the built environment contributes about 40% of CO2. So we're starting to see the beginnings of a regulatory reform that's going to impact on carbon. both operational carbon and I think eventually embodied carbon, including the nature of waste and the type of materials you're using. So that's not one of the key drivers for change at the moment. Where I think most people are coming from is the pounds, shillings and pence, if I'm really honest, in terms of cost. But not just capital cost. I think there's a recognition of the time cost of money. So it links to your second point around speed. There's definitely a sense of how do we get things done quicker, particularly in a post-COVID environment where there's risks now of delays on sites if you're too labour intensive. So the desire to build quickly, to do it at a competitive price, or at least a more certain price, I think is driving many of the discussions around the adoption of MMC. But I think that ultimately will also expand to carbon when government programs for reform start to kick in over the next few years.
Yeah, for sure. Tom, thank you for the question. That was a great question. All right, Henry Mickelberg. I knew something was going to come up with Henry. I'm going to bet that that'll be a parametric digitization of MMC products rather than legislation that'll act as the game changer.
Yeah, so I think Henry's right. I think the power of technology is largely untapped at the moment, and I think this whole idea of having a kit of parts approach where you have digital design, which is generative, it's intelligent, probably artificially intelligence driven. You have parametric rules that define the scope to which components and sub-assemblies and building systems can be put together. All of a sudden you have a very powerful way of designing, manufacturing and delivering buildings. And we're starting to see some of the work my own business is doing in terms of parametric design is starting to lift the lid on how space age some of this stuff it actually is. And it could well be that kind of level of disruption. We're talking about whole buildings being designed at the press of a button. We're talking about buildings being priced automatically through online dynamic purchasing systems. We're talking about orders being placed with factories from a digital 3D model, all the way through to verified install on site with digital site-based tools, evaluating the final build. And that's hugely disruptive. So I think ultimately legislation is more of a pump primer, in my opinion. So some of the things I talked about earlier in terms of government interventions are more about just priming the market towards change. I think when we get the full power of technology and disruption really taking hold, then the benefits of moving to a different way of delivering will be so compelling that it actually won't need government intervention. It will just be the way that we do things because it's a better way, it's a more effective way, it's a better way of making money, etc., etc. So I think Henry's point is valid. I think we're going to see some hugely powerful technology-driven changes disrupting the market.
Yeah. So are you seeing industries or businesses changing to incorporate digitization and so forth in their businesses now? Yeah.
So it's really interesting. Some of the big off-site manufacturing businesses in the UK, machines and stuff that they've invested in, but what they're realizing is they're still missing a full end-to-end digital platform. So this sort of utopian vision of having a digital design tool that links to your manufacturing, links to your supply chain, links to what you do on site, links to your HR systems, your procurement inventory, your ordering, a full ERP type system, as well as a technology-based system for design and manufacture, is sort of this holy grail that more and more businesses are starting to go after. And it's really tough because there's no standard proprietary solution for that. That's a really complex piece of technology and systems integration that needs a lot of innovation and time and effort being spent. And there's a few businesses I'm aware of in the UK working hard on that at the moment to create a full digital platform. Because if you can do that, you start to bring the whole benefit of digital manufacturing and design to the consumer, because it's where, the likes of Japan, for instance, where there's been great innovation in manufacturing homes. It's, they deliver homes in much the same way as they deliver automotive products there. It's a very different market in many respects to both the UK and the US, but they have used technology in a very much more powerful way to enable consumers to configure, to choose, to go on a customer journey in a very different way. And I can see that coming. more and more global construction economies.
Yeah, and are you seeing this as new entrants, or are you seeing some of the people that are been in this industry for years starting to come up with solutions, adopt solutions, or how do you see it coming forward? Is there going to be a mix of both?
It's a mix of both, Dave. I think you clearly have new entrants coming in, disrupting markets, and we've seen that in the UK. We've seen Sekisui, who are a major Japanese home builder, establish a joint venture with a British developer, Open Splash, and Sekisui House are one of those home builders that I just mentioned that have used technology and manufacturing in a really inventive way, in a very consumer-centric way as well. So they're completely focused on the customer. The Japanese attention to your consumer market is unprecedented in terms of home building in many respects. So I see that disruption coming. Hasn't quite landed yet in the UK, but it's not just those new players coming in. In fairness, there's some pretty traditional, long-established companies where the penny is now dropping, whether they're contracting businesses or consulting businesses or subcontracting or supplying businesses. This whole thing about modernise or die is starting to mean something for all of them, all in slightly different ways. It's all about context at the end of the day, but they recognise there's an impact on their business model and there's a need to remain relevant and future-proof, which ultimately involves some form of business model change, technology, embracement, or reskilling, or actually all of those things.
Yeah, for sure. And are you seeing? Let me ask you this then, because you are talking to governments all over the world, but specifically UK based. Are you seeing an interest in doing more business here in the United States with those companies, with the opportunity for them to expand here? Because in a lot of ways, a lot of the countries overseas, in manufacturing offsite, they're much further along than we are here with the adoption.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say from a British perspective, the market is in a phase of getting its own house in order. So even though we're starting to see some really interesting progress, by no means are we a mature sector when it comes to construction innovation, offsite manufacturing technology. We're still pretty much work in progress. We've got to get to a steady state to serve our own market before there's any realistic chance of starting to think about exporting solutions, whether it's just IP, intellectual property, or whether it's physical construction solutions. I don't quite see that yet, but the great thing about innovation, and particularly technology-led innovation, is once you've done the hard yards and you've established that IP, then it is pretty transferable. And the global impact of that, including to the US and the wider North American market, I see as being huge potential. As you say, there's large parts of the US where it's a massive opportunity to embed new ways of working. Clearly there's also a little bit of thinking that parts of the US are actually leading the charge, particularly in technology, and particularly some of what you hear coming out of West Coast, Silicon Valley type thinking, meets construction. There's definitely a sense that there's some interesting stuff happening in the US. So I wouldn't suggest that you guys are a million miles away in some respects from what's going on elsewhere. It's just that you've got a much bigger market, a much more fragmented market, I would suggest, that's going to be tougher to change, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I agree. All right, so I got two more things, and I want to get back into this disruption and whether it's going to be good or bad for us. So, Alistair Sawyer, thanks very much. Saving man hours with improved quality control systems is MMC. Yeah, very much so. All right, and then we have Dwayne C. Barney, residential construction business. Tech disruption is hampered by inconsistent local requirements and zoning. This could be where legislation serves a vital role. That's a good comment, huh?
It is, yeah, and I see that in terms of the need for regulatory consistency. So it's really difficult in a technical area such as building codes or design standards to actually drive something at scale. If every state you go to, or every local authority you go to has different rules. It's not insurmountable. At the end of the day, technology is, it's all about rules and setting rules as algorithms or whatever, so it can all be dealt with. But clearly in manufacturing, you need scale and consistency, and the more you can align to common standards, then the more potential there is to get economies of scale.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let's hop into wrapping some final comments up here. So a lot of things were based around like, who are going to be the disruptors? Is it going to be tech? Is it going to be manufacturing? Is it going to be fintech? Is it going to be people within our industry? I guess is one of the things. And then the other side of this is, how do we? Is tech going to prepare us to do more with less? Right, because we have two things here. So who are the disruptors going to be, and are they going to be good, bad for us? Because disruption, as you said, in our offline conversation, can actually harm us if we're not careful about it. So I'm curious in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think I get the sense that true disruption in construction probably has to come from out with the industry. I think just the fact that everyone working in the industry is conditioned in a certain way, and we just, it's really difficult to have a fresh perspective sometimes. Even those people, who would say they're disruptors are always slightly constrained by the fact that they've always worked in construction. So I think the real disruption is going to come from outside our industry. It's going to come from, not just, the usual suspects quoted would be automotive or aerospace, where, their own markets are going through huge change at the moment. And they have, a mindset and approach around manufacturing and technology, which is years ahead of construction. You can see some very easy horizontal innovation driving from their sectors into our sector. But I think even there's probably a limit to sort of true impact of what they might bring. I think technology companies definitely. So you hear a lot about the Googles and the Amazons making a foray into construction. I think you're going to see that. I'm not, whether it is Google or Amazon or not, who knows? But you're going to see something happen there. And I just think you'll see a new breed of entrepreneur coming in that actually has a different approach and sees opportunities. Now, whether it's good or bad disruption, and your second point, remains to be seen. I think to an extent that is slightly reliant on how the construction industry actually responds, because it could be negative disruption where you send the industry backwards, because there's huge waves of disruption that come into the industry that destabilize markets, cause existing businesses to go out of business, and you actually reduce capacity and choice, and that could not be good for consumers ultimately. So you need to go on a measured journey of transforming construction where the old and the new coexist side by side, but gradually the new is influencing the old, and we get this gradual shift by osmosis to a new way of doing things. And that does need the old bit of the industry to respond and to react, going back to what I said earlier in terms of, you can't sit still. The risk of doing nothing is perhaps too great now.
Sure. So how is it that we're going to do more with less then, right? If we don't have the skilled trade labor, right? We have some technology, but it's not to where it needs to be just yet. What is your thoughts on that? How do we do more with less?
Well, the basic challenge there is all about productivity. If to be able to do more with less, you can only do that by being more productive. And whether that's a very physical thing like a site operation or a site activity where you're trying to create a unit of output, whether it's a wall or a flooring system or a roofing system, to deliver whatever it is with less site labor means you have to improve your productivity. I think it's important to make sure that we're not inadvertently falling into the trap of moving inefficient, unproductive processes off-site as well. There's a really interesting challenge here that moving off-site and moving to factories, it is actually equally as possible to have inefficient and unproductive factories as it is to have unproductive construction sites. So there is a challenge about using technology. For me, technology is the key word here. The way we're going to deliver more with less is to embrace technology, to embrace a manufacturing mindset, to reskill the workforce, and to upskill the workforce, and to attract a new workforce in some respects, all of those things really, and put those things together in a way that actually enables us to go after the waste, the 50% waste I talked about. That's how we're going to do more with less, because we're not going to waste as much.
That's right. Less dumpsters. Love it. So, all right, Mark. I mean, there's so much to unpack. We got a couple more comments. We're at an hour already, but we're going to have a follow-up conversation, because I really want to learn more about the education system and how we're going to transform that education system to bring the youth back in, how we teach them. So there's already some of that happening here in this country with Stonepile Construction College, which is phenomenal, because even with that school, you don't need traditional, high school like test scores and all that. You just need a high school diploma, and you need to write why you want to be in offsite construction. And it's all about offsite construction. You can get an associate's, a bachelor's, or a master's, and they're making it super, super easy. But how we are teaching and sharing knowledge today is going to be a big factor on how we change the mind of the youth as well. And I think that's a whole lot of conversation to unpack.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to come back and continue the discussion, Dave. I think, as you say, education and, having a workforce for the future in itself is a whole hour debate, I would suspect.
Well, it definitely is. It definitely is. So we got a couple more comments. We always want to get to the people that are taking time out of their day to join us. So let's jump in here if you have a second still. Whoop. There you go, Ryan. Mark, you were such a huge influencer now in the relation to MMC. Can I ask if you are working with anyone in the education sector to promote careers or education within the MMC? Well, that's a good comment. I am seeing some colleges and universities adding courses and qualifications, which is great, but we are finding it difficult to get engagement from the majority. Can you offer any advice?
Yeah, so thanks, Rhiannon. I am working hard in this whole area of how we get new skills and training embedded into the industry, and certainly in terms of our qualifications regime and the standards by which we want to embed into our industry, whether that's in technical education or professional education. So I'm talking a lot, particularly with universities in the UK, in relation to running new courses. You may know that I'm a trustee of the George Clark's charity Moby. And for those in the US, you might not know. I don't know whether George's TV programs run in the US, but he's quite a well-known architect here in the UK that has a series of television programs. He's a bit of a celebrity, and George runs a charity which is all about inspiring young kids to come into our industry. So Moby run various courses from college, 16 years old, all the way through to PhDs. And yeah, it's tough, because, and actually what part of the problem is, how do you convince universities and colleges to run future-looking courses when actually the employers of today are not asking for those skills? And when the colleges want to be creating work-ready students who are highly employable, there's this challenge between setting a curriculum which is future-looking as opposed to having the skills that you need in the here and now. The reality is you need both. You need to design curricula and courses where people are good to go in a construction industry that's still pretty traditional, but are actually equipped with those things that are going to make them relevant and future-proofed.
Great question. Thank you very much, Rian. Love it. All right, last comment today, we're going to go with Dr. Brent Musson. Do you weigh tech and automation as more of a solution than better process for human labor?
Yeah, really interesting one. I couldn't answer it on an empirical basis in terms of whether someone's done a study on that, and I think that is something that's well worth a study if it hasn't been done. But the process, the whole thing about efficiency and effectiveness, it's relevant here. As I say, that it's highly, you can go and spend a lot of money automating a process that actually was better off done as a manual labor process, but better. So I think it's a legitimate challenge in terms of making sure that when we're re-engineering our processes, we don't get carried away in thinking everything has to be done by a robot. And it's clearly not the case. I think there's a combination of things, different approaches where we augment and we support human operations and the processes which we carry out in a normal way, with the power of technology and manufacturing sitting alongside. So I'm sure there's some really interesting time and motion type exercises that can be done on that, though, to work out where that's appropriate or not.
All right, everybody, listen. Man, that's a busy show, Mark. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I think we covered a lot of ground.